Your studio manager.
All right.
Welcome to the Kingston Creative Meetup. Tonight we're talking about creative arts, visual arts careers, value and validation. Why do we need to validate these careers? Why has it been a struggle for us to do? And we have a wonderful panelists lined up, very able to discuss with us how we can get our visual artist careers validated, why it's important, and what are the different things that we need to know to overcome these challenges. Our panel includes, let me give you the rundown, Bernard Hoyce, who's a visual artist, O'Neill Lawrence, who is the Chief Curator of the National Gallery of Jamaica, Eric Hanks, an African-American and Pan-African art appraiser, Anderson Pilgrim, who is the Executive Director of Caribbean Fine Art Fair, Sean Henry, visual artist and art catalogist, documenter, and CCH founder, actress and international gallerist and curator. I'd love to invite all my panelists to the spotlight to briefly introduce themselves to you and for us to kick off this amazing conversation. We want to remind you, those who are joining us on YouTube or here on the Zoom, feel free to drop your questions in those chats and we will field them to our speakers. And of course, feel free to share your own stories. You have a moment to share those with each other and to have conversations in the chats as well. Welcome to the meetup, Anderson, Eric, and Bernard. As we wait on the others, we can kick off the conversation. Tell us a little bit about yourself. I'll start off with the closest to my right, which is Anderson.
Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be with you. I'm a curator of over 25 years. Executive Director of Caribbean Fine Art Fair for the last 11 years. We are about to have our 12th annual event held in Barbados, and Bernard and several other Jamaican artists have participated over the years. It's been said we are the only such event in the region, and my whole motivation is to promote and market Caribbean art to the world. So that's what I've been doing.
Thank you so much, Anderson. We're looking forward to hearing a lot more about that as we continue this conversation. I'm going to go straight to Bernard to briefly introduce yourself to us. Some of us may know you. You can go ahead and let us know a little bit more about you.
Well, visual artist, lifetime, started my my calling in Raytown, Kingston, and I've kept my pursuit as fresh and as relevant as I can over the years. And it's a pleasure to be associated with Kingston Creative, because you guys gave me a reboot on my vision just to see you guys involved like this. And so in terms of my career and my resume, it's vast because I've never really done anything else, and art has been the only vehicle for my earnings. So, it's still to come, still doing my best work. So my pleasure to be here.
We're happy to have you as well. And welcome, Eric. We'd love to hear a little bit about you.
Oh, thank you. First of all, thanks for inviting me to participate. It's a pleasure to be here. I've known Bernard for quite a while, and CCH as well. But at any rate, again, my name's Eric Hanks. I'm the director of M. Hanks Gallery, which for about 20 some odd years was located in Santa Monica. Now I'm talking to you from my new space in Fullerton, California. I opened my gallery in 1988. Elizabeth Catlett was the first exhibiting artist. My specialty is African-American art, but I've shown Bernard's work, other Caribbean work, artwork, and also the work of a Senegalese painter that I really still admire greatly. I'm also a certified appraiser, and I recently started a podcast called Eric's Perspective, which I invite everybody to give a listen to. So thanks again.
Amazing. And we'll encourage you. You can drop that in the chat to everyone so they can see the name of the podcast and they can always hop onto it and give, listening and give some feedback as well. I believe we have O'Neill joining us. I see him on camera here. Could we invite him to the spotlight, please? And in the meantime, while tech support assists us with bringing O'Neill to the spotlight, tonight is going to be a little different. Bernard will be handling the conversation as well. So we'll be co-hosting this beautiful evening. And it's amazing to have a visual artist talking about this because it would be from the first person and it would be a good way to moderate a beautiful conversation like this. So as we wait on our other panelists, we can definitely jump right into the conversation. So I hand over to you, Bernard, and I'll still be here to listen in.
Okay. So how many people we have joining us currently right now? So I have an idea who I'm speaking to.
Well, on our spotlight now, we have Anderson and Eric. We expect the others to join us in a few. So we're expecting O'Neill, Sean, and also CCH Pounder to join us later on. But we can definitely start off, and as they join, we can bring them into the conversation.
Okay. My motivation for doing this particular, it's not a venue that I work well in. I'm still new to it, but on the thread for the Kingston Creative, I pay attention to what the young artists are talking about, and I pipe in occasionally and get into the conversation and kind of jog their reasoning in terms of what their intentions and how they feel about assessing their work in the conditions on the island of Jamaica. And what I found out is that there's a vast talent, but they're just bottlenecked. And in that bottleneck, there's a lot of miscommunications, misunderstanding, and misinformation about how the art world works. And I thought that it'd be a good idea to have some conversation about how a local Jamaican artist can see and perceive himself or herself on making the transition from being a local Jamaican artist to an artist of international status. And the only way to do this was to give them enough information, expose them to information in what the highest strata of the art field is and how it's conducted and how it's navigated. And that's really what I'm trying to do. So it's like with Anderson has been working with the Caribbean arts genre, which is something that I saw years ago as the only way for my art to have a legacy.
That's beautiful. And before we dive straight into the conversation, I see we have O'Neill Lawrence joining us, who is the Chief Curator of the National Gallery of Jamaica. Welcome to the conversation, O'Neill. It's nice to have you.
I'm happy to be here. Sorry that I had a little bit of a technical issue before, but
that's how it goes. Back. We totally understand. And we'd love for you to tell our friends a little bit about you,
yes, please
so that we can get to know everyone a part of this conversation.
Okay, well, I as you said, I'm the Chief Curator of the National Gallery. I've been at the gallery for a little over 14 years now in various capacities. I started off as an outreach officer. I mean, I still enjoy interaction with people, even though I don't get to do it as much anymore. I am an artist also, second generation. I'm a writer and a researcher. I focus mostly on Caribbean art from the 1950s in terms of my research, and I really deal with gender issues in terms of my visual arts production.
Oh, we love that. Love that. So we're excited to dig a lot more into that as we continue this conversation as well. Over to you again, Bernard.
Yes. So inviting Anderson because as a curator and director of an art fair in the Caribbean and sustaining it for all those years, kind of kept the whole idea of the Caribbean genre alive. Now with Eric, I've exhibited with Eric and he has represented my work over the years. And he has helped me to see a way that I could participate as an African-American artist, because in a sense, I started out that way from my years, my early years in New York at the Art Student League. As at that time, Black art was the current focus. Most artists of color were considered, the whole Pan-African genre was alive, and there was a Black arts mode that was being in really a scene, really, not just in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Chicago, New York, but by the early 80s, with the advent of changes in reflecting on Black people's status in the United States and trying to get leadership, we had Jesse Jackson's run for presidency, and African American became the terminology and it became the scene. But it was out of that scene that came a self-validation movement for the arts, because there was a necessary value that has to be put to the arts, African American art, Black art, and the only way for it to happen, it had to be opened up. So there was a self-validated movement where artists took their careers in their hands, and they found subject matter in ethnic identity, history, social consciousness, and celebrated and created a market in the mainstream, which before most Black artists had to find a way to support themselves either through the foundations that, like the Armand Foundation, that would give validation to certain artists and support them. And those were just a few of the outlets.
Okay.
The Schomburg in New York.
If we were to bring it to the Caribbean, for example, and as we have a wide range of panelists here, I would love to hear from all of us in terms of why do we need, or what does it mean to validate creative careers, specifically visual arts, within the different areas that we work. So if you were to throw it to O'Neill, for example, what does that mean for Jamaica? And why and why do we need to validate it here? And what does it mean?
Well, to be honest, I mean, particularly since I found out the topic of this conversation, I've been thinking about what are the parameters of validation. A lot of times, artists think about, is it exhibiting in a space like the National Gallery? I mean, is that validation of say talent? I mean, a lot of these things are very subjective. So I find it, sometimes I think about it and I understand that some people can view things like particular goals as, validation, particular awards as validation. But I think, I mean, for me, particular sales as validation. And it, when you're in a contexts like Jamaica, like the Caribbean, sometimes those things are difficult because venues for exhibition, venues for sales are limited. So it's a situation where we have a broad, I mean, a large number of very talented people, but not everyone can necessarily be in a space at a particular time. So is that the kind of validation that people want or need? Or is it validation coming from the audience? Is it validation knowing that you've connected with the people who you are trying to communicate a particular concept with? So for me, there are different types of validation, and I'm not trying to privilege one over the other. But I think that in these kinds of conversations, we need to consider all of them as having value.
I think that's a good point. And
Yeah.
I'd like to piggyback on what Bernard was saying earlier also. During the time period, the 80s into the 90s, I think, for me, in my introduction to the visual art world, Caribbean art was also always subsumed under another category. It was Latin American and Caribbean art. It was African American Caribbean art, or it was always and something or something and Caribbean art. And there was no specific understanding of Caribbean art as a genre unto itself, or a sector within the art world unto itself. I think for me, the Caribbean Visions exhibit that traveled the US in the 1990s was the first time it traveled to 5 institutions in the Caribbean. It was produced by, the chief curator was Samela Lewis, the great Samela Lewis, who was based out in California, but she was writing for the Hampton Museum about Caribbean art for the longest time, and that was the only kind of publication that you could find out there, written, substantive work about artists in the Caribbean and all that entails. So for me, the validation of Caribbean art, as O'Neill said, it takes on many characters, but I think for the region, I think what we want to see is the respect of the international art world, and looking at the region as a place where talent is being produced, and the unique type of expression that's coming from the region. I mean, if you look now at the world art market, and you look at many of the major markets, the US, the UK, and many European nations, you will see that many artists who are coming to the fore in these locations have background from our region. And even if they immigrated, they held on to many of the aspects that exposed them to the arts in the beginning, and they've incorporated into their lifestyle wherever they live. So, validation takes many different, it can be expressed in many different ways, I should say. But exposure at the top level, museums, major collections, these types of things, that's what I guess most people think of as validation.
Maybe Eric, you might have something to say on value as an appraiser and a facilitator of collections.
Yeah, of course. So everything that I agree with what's been said up till now, when you think about validation, it can take many forms. But I just know from my experience, so I opened my gallery in 1988, and it's 30 some odd years ago, but in the scheme of things, it's not all that long ago. And you mentioned earlier about Samela Lewis, who's still alive, by the way, here in LA. When she wrote some of the stuff that she was writing in the early days, I mean, there wasn't that much being said about the category of African American art as well. So part of the validation comes from scholarship, like Samela had done. And before her, it was James Porter and Alain Locke. Part of the validation comes from museum exhibitions, and also when museums purchase works for their permanent collection. And obviously commercial galleries like mine, when we sell works, and if somebody buys it, it's not just the money, which is obviously very important, but somebody thought enough of that artist's work to actually exchange money for it. So that is also a form of validation.
Yes.
I was talking with Alonzo Davis, who with his brother Dale established the Brockman Gallery in LA back in the 60s. And I tell you, another form of validation was what they were doing. So it was not just a commercial gallery, but they would gather artists together and critique each other's work. So that's like a validation, but also a kind of mentorship that was involved. So all those things, I think, form like an ecosystem. And it's very difficult for, I don't care what you call the art. I don't care who the artist is. It's very difficult for an artist to make that sort of transition from, just being an artist, doing stuff they like, to everybody really recognizing them for being the talented artists that they are. And there's famous examples like if you go outside of the US, Van Gogh, I mean, during his lifetime, his brother couldn't even basically give away his artwork. The validation came really after he passed away. So in general, it's a challenge. But all those things, I think, have to be in place, I think, if an artist wants to be known beyond their own sort of circle, so to speak.
Yes, I want to add to that validation aspect. There also is a concentrated effort to manufacture validation to assist with identifying pricing for the art. So that's one level of validation that is very much current at this point in the artwork.
Well, let me just say this real quick, though, because that's like one of those things that's kind of elusive, like the value. And what it boils down to is, what one person is willing to spend for a work of art, for example. And so as an appraiser, one of the first things that I do when I'm trying to track down the value, suppose somebody's asking me to appraise and say, hey, how much is this particular piece worth? I have to consult auction records, and those commercial galleries that are willing to share information, would say, hey, listen, I sold a piece similar to that a year ago for X number of dollars. And so it's that kind of history that aids me as an appraiser to figure out what something's currently worth. But of course, that begs the question, if somebody has never sold anything before, then what is the value? And that's kind of a tricky thing because there's no track record to trace it back, just as a practical thing as an appraiser.
I know Anil wants to jump in here to comment on what we've been talking about.
There's just one, with all these different perspectives and validation, I have been thinking about us again here within our context, because it always seems that the gold standard of validation seems to be international acclaim or international sales or so on. But I wonder if local Jamaican artists and curators are thinking about the great value that exists here, because it is one thing to, they always say that prophet is never healed in his own land. I always wonder about, the validation of making it in Jamaica. And I'm just saying that because I know it's definitely not easy. I know it's extremely difficult, and sometimes, especially with the economies that exist in Jamaica, within the Caribbean, it's not all often enough to sustain the amount of artists that we have. But I'm always hearing, various narratives, and there's nothing wrong with it, but it always seems to be that, the international seems to take precedence over the local. And for me, I just don't want the local value to be lost in these conversations.
Well, the reason, let me just add to your what you're saying there. The reason for this conversation that we're having is to give the artists currently that is bottleneck, the ones that think their only outlet is Jamaican validation. We have to give them a vision of the total aspect of the various validation that they could seek themselves that goes beyond Jamaica. It's not to say that that validation is more, but that it exists. That's what we try. And if I know there's a level that exists to my ascension for my art, I know I can try to achieve it. But if I don't know it, it never occurred to me, and I have no way of planning. Ryan.
And I agree with you, you know. I do agree with you. I'm not disagree with you. It's just that my sometimes fear is that the conversation might turn away from here, and that the attention might turn away, and that, you know, the local perspective might be lost. So I agree with you totally. I think that the perspectives need to be broadened. But I just can't, I just had that thought to say, okay, we're broadening it, but don't lose sight of here.
Yeah, well, broaden it and elevate it at the same time, I'm hoping.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in here because this is very relevant to the overall conversation. I think that, well, for me personally, it's one of the reasons why my partners and I envision Caribbean Fine Art Fair to be held in the Caribbean instead of in the US, where we were all based. For many years before we began in 2011, we were exhibiting Caribbean artists internationally, and that was the focus at the time. But we felt that it was time to turn things around and invite the art world to come to our region and see the artists in their environment, and also be able to tap into what's happening in the region with the emerging artists and the other artists that we are speaking about that no one had heard of. They might not be they wouldn't have been in the books written at the time. And the other side of that is the continuing scholarship about the artists in our region. Writers, curators, and researchers coming to the region and given that the factual background, the statistics, the information that is now available, because when I first got into the arts, Caribbean art, there was hardly any scholarship available, very few. Early Pupi wrote Caribbean art. I encountered that early on, the catalog for Caribbean Visions, the exhibit that I mentioned, which Samela Lewis was behind, and my late partner, Dr. Gloria Gordon. These were the very few publications that were available at the time about Caribbean art. Now there are many more publications available. For Jamaican art, there are several publications about the movements and the artists from Jamaica, and many of the other islands have been contributing to that scholarship. So now we have a reservoir of information, whereas 25 years ago, it was not available.
And I just wanted to jump in and just say, I would think local validation would go a long ways towards helping to gain the broader validation. For example.
Correct.
I think that if you're recognized in your home country, that could be kind of a stepping stone. If the artist is interested in taking that next step, I would think that would be a helpful thing.
Yeah, and that usually is the stepping stone. But now there's documentation of the artists, the region, and the different steps that these artists have taken. So
absolutely, I think that's important as well. Absolutely,
very, very important. And the sales numbers are important too. But the scholarship really is the thing, because when I meet collectors and when I speak to people at exhibitions and so on, and I usually have my army of publications with me, and I can point them to, well, look, if you want to learn more about these artists here, you can go and look at this publication, or you can look at this, you can read about that. And this just gives more the word validation to what we're trying to do in marketing ourselves and marketing our culture and our region, and inviting folks to come to the region now and continue that research and delve further into it.
Yes, the Bernard Hoyes here. On the value and the individual artists and their attempt at value, it's imperative that they have an understanding that the value of the work can be created in how they pursue a career. Validation is one thing, but identifying historical the historical gaps that needs to be filled, the topics, the highlight that needs to be addressed, they can make their work valuable enough to have it validated in all strata, not just in the local strata. There's always going to be a fight for creating value for the work, but until you put it in the marketplace, the value is not going to be determined. And we have to let them realize that they have to make art or do art for themselves, but also they have to make sure that it finds its way to the marketplace. And that's where Anderson comes in with the art fair and the Caribbean Arts Fair, because he makes it a regional endeavor. You can elevate your art beyond Jamaica to participate in the conversation in the region, and in highlighting the region and its importance and its special characteristics that is unique to the world at large. It will give it enough validation so that it could compete internationally. And this is what I would like to see highlighted, so that Jamaican artists know that there is another level of evolving that can happen, and they can have a conversation with other artists from the other islands. It's one of the things that Kingston Creative, in terms of their grant proposals, is that the participation from the inter-islands throughout the Caribbean show just how much talent is there, and that there is a conversation going on and it needs to be documented.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And we have comments in the chat also talking about looking at our local space. I see Viral has a comment speaking of the Ligoni Art Fair, as well as we have the National Gallery. We have O'Neill here who can probably talk about some of the activities that they would have hosted before certain limitations came into place, because we have also in the chat Errol speaking of the limited opportunities here. So we've been talking a lot about the importance of validating the work, but now it would be important for us to look at what are some of those things we can do. I know Bernard touched a little bit on it in accessing those things available, but locally, what would we say are those opportunities that artists can take advantage of to start that validation in the different ways that, you know, they would look at validation?
I think, well, of course, there are exhibitions. That seems to be always the first thing that people think about. But what I find to be most, I think, beneficial to a lot of artists are a lot of our residencies, and residencies at entities like, say, New Local Space, NLS. I think opportunities for growth and development are some of the things that I think particularly younger artists need to look at, not just exhibiting, but being able to have a space and a place where they can explore without necessarily the pressure of saying, okay, this is going to have to be sold, or this is going to have to meet a particular expectation, because artists need sometimes that space, but also that community. That's one of the interests. That's one of, I think, the most important things that's happening even here with Kingston Creative, the Meetup and so on, is to create that community for artists. Because if you are isolated, if you're in a vacuum trying to create, that for me is one of the major problems. So I think in terms of if we're considering valuing artists, and then of course there's also, Anderson spoke about in terms of, publications, books and so on, having a more robust system that is documenting and also analyzing what is happening within the visual arts. I think that's something that we need, and something that we need not just from international perspectives, but something that we need from local people. We need more people. We need more opinions. We need more voices locally and also internationally, of course, talking about what's happening in the visual arts. I think those are the things that if there's going to be some kind of investment policy, some kind of, program that can highlight that, those are some of the things that I think would be of greatest value for artists.
Amazing.
Well, I'd like to add to that about the different levels that can be added. Like, for instance, we need more scholarship, but we also need critics, and we need more people writing on art. And we have to make those things available to the young artists and let them know that this is a line that they can take up other than their artistic practices, where they too can become critics or reviewers of art, because they understand the practice and the discipline of art, and they should have enough confidence and be validated in taking it up as a sideline or as a main line, because the road to being a big famous artist has a lot of trajectory and a lot of sidelines that becomes more interesting as you find out you're more talented for that, and you get more validation for that, and maybe that's where you want to go. But they ought to be able to feel that they can do this without having to just be pigeonholed into being that painter or being that sculptor.
Amazing.
Yeah,
and for
go
those
ahead.
of our friends who are just joining us, let me just tell you, we're talking about validating careers in the visual arts, and we are right on the topic of what are those things that we can do to validate locally and not just preparing for the international space. And Anderson was just about to drop a gem on us, so back to you, Anderson.
Yes, speaking about the critical writing, I've heard it across the region that there was very little critical writing in many of the islands, and I think that's something that our art schools need to look at a little more in encouraging people, young talented folks, to maybe do some more in those areas. And there's also the fact that there may be less of a financial return in that area, but it's something that can be developed along with your practice, with an artistic practice. Just being able to critically assess what is being produced is important, I think, and it's something that is missing in a lot of our communities in the region.
To be honest, I think that, sorry, I do think that, I just want to address what Alice said real quick, is that I do think that the art school, I mean, way back when I was a student, there was encouragement for people to become, to become writers, to become critical. I think what the issue is, it's really a little bit more of the infrastructure and the environment. Is like, okay, you want to become a writer. What's your venue? Is it going to be a blog? Is it going to be a newspaper? Are the local newspapers interested in young and emerging writers or so on? Too. So that's kind of one of the things that's one of the things I think needs to also be addressed, because there is a larger framework that needs some investment. I mean, not just the arts. I agree that it needs to come from a particular source that's connecting with the people who have the capacity. But I think the broader framework also needs some work, to be honest.
Yeah.
Well, I know some of that scholarship that we were talking about earlier is coming from art history majors, people that are not really artists, but are really specializing in research and that kind of thing. And so I'm not sure what the situation is in the Caribbean, but here in the States, I know there's a lot of art history majors that end up being curators as well as critics and writers and so forth. So, and even writers that are not trained as artists, but I think that could also be a rich source. One final point is, I agree with everything that everybody said about the various venues for, say you write a critique, where does it end up being read? How is it made available? But one good thing about modern technology, at least there's more options now than it used to be. It's not a panacea, but it's improvement.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and you can do a blog, you can go direct to the market and social media platforms, or a younger generation of artists are definitely taking advantage of those opportunities to not only connect with international curators and collectors, but also to just interact with one another across the region and speak about their practices, and it's, you're right. I mean, it's the whole media situation has changed in front of our eyes also. So the opportunities are different, but I think there might be more now than there were before when it was just the written word in newspapers. But you just have to find your niche, and that's really
Bernard Hoisier, the encouragement in this part of the venue do have a value, and it's in publishing and reviews and critiques. That's a publishing foundation. And somehow we have to impart where the monetization of these disciplines is, and how it can be, and how it can be a form of validation for the whole cultural spectrum. And if we're validating the whole cultural spectrum, we automatically validate the individual participants and contributors. And so we have to look at it as a whole mechanism, a whole organism. And but we have to find where the value lies and how the values is seeked, and how to realize it.
Well, I think we're going towards speaking about the secondary market now. And that's where, and definitely that's where we all want to end up going. And I know that from my observations, I've seen the trajectory of Latin American art before and African American art, and these particular genres went through this process where they were kind of outside the mainstream. And once one or two well-known, prominently known artists started to had their work sold in the secondary market at auction, that created the marker for the entire genre. And it opened up the entire monetization of African American and Latin American art once these particular artists reached that secondary market and were given a value. That's the marker. And I think the two areas we're speaking about here, Caribbean art as a genre unto itself, and then also the valuation of it is leading to that direction. And what's our next step is really the question.
It used to be, when I was doing appraisals in the early days, the only African-American artist that had any kind of significant track record in the auction market was Romare Bearden.
Right, that's right.
There was an occasional pop-up of, say, something by Henry Tanner or a rare Palmer Hayden or something like that. But nowadays, you can do a search and there's all kinds of stuff that pops up. Swan Galleries in New York established an entire department that focuses solely on African-American art. And now there's a new one that popped up, a relatively new, Black Art Auction. So those kinds of things have definitely made for like an explosion, combined with traveling museum exhibits and stuff like that, and highly publicized
contemporary African art now with Bonhams in London, and that has exploded on the market too. And it's the combination, as you said, of the exhibitions, the scholarship, and the collector base now getting involved.
Oh yeah, for a lot of the collectors, it was like a whole new area of collecting.
Yes.
And they were looking at it almost, I don't know if this is good or bad. Some people might say it's bad, but they were kind of looking at it as somebody might look at stocks or bonds or anything like that. It's like an untapped area, buy low and sell high kind of thing. But for whatever the motivation, a lot of increased investment in the auction market came as a result of some people thinking that, oh, this is like kind of new territory.
Yeah.
I
think that's valid. It's perfectly valid.
About commercial value on the pieces, and we have some comments in the chat speaking of the importance of social value being placed on the art. And definitely, as we move to inviting our audience to speak, we'll definitely have Germanic Council and Viral to join the conversation to share their thoughts on the importance of social validation for these pieces. I'd love for us to, before we get to that, speak a little bit about the need for cataloging art pieces and looking at appraisals in the Caribbean. And for any new artists who may be joining us on this call, I'd love to start off with us just defining that for them. What does that involve? And how do we go about doing that in our Caribbean space? I'm throwing that to anybody.
Yeah,
anyone can take that one.
Well, I'd like to speak about that gap. The examples of the transition from local to monetarizing the arts in the auction houses. It has to be a pursuit by the community from that genre. I remember when Mary Jane Rodriguez was pursuing Latin American art to be placed as a permanent category in the auction houses. One of the first things she did was put together a journal, very similar to the journal that Smella Lewis was doing in Black Arts and the international scene. And both those journals are a good example of the groundswell for the value of the arts from each community. And if it was only 5 years ago that Swan took up the baton to carry a category of African American art, and they have grown leaps and bounds since that first auction that they did. And in looking at Caribbean arts, I think there's also a need for that. That's why the groundswell of Jamaica being a very prominent contributor to the cultural arts in the Caribbean, and the amount of talent, visual arts, irregardless, in terms of historical and legacy, I think we're in position to make that happen. We just have to do more validating for the writers and these historians. We need to get more involvement with the Jamaica Journal, the University of the West Indies Journal of Literature, all those periodicals and magazines that are out. We need to engage them with the visual arts. I've been trying, and occasionally I make a breakthrough and I get one of my pieces selected to be with the journal. But the thing is that I'm doing it on my own as a self-validated artist because I know I have to make my own opportunities. But for the National Gallery, the Institute, the School of Art, this is something they have to make. They have to make a bridge to those publications.
And I'd love
But
for Neil in here.
no, I just don't want us to. I mean, I agree in a lot of with most of what was said, but I just don't want us to lose sight of the other values of art, like the social value of art, because and the social impact that art can have. Because I mean, not just spaces like the National Gallery, but even like I would extend it to spaces outside of the gallery, like Kingston Creative's mural project, for example. I mean, we have to think about what value art can bring to people's lives too, since we're talking about value, right?
Yeah, well, we understand that already.
Well, no. I know we have. I mean, I may have missed a little bit of it, but I was just saying that I think that in terms of value, art, creating art and art spaces, creating platforms for conversations about social issues. And we all know that we have a lot of things that are happening in the world right now. And I don't always like to think of artists being just all like these transmitters for everything that's happening. But sometimes it is necessary to have a space and a place created for these conversations, and a medium that makes it easy for people to have these conversations and have these meditations on what's really going on. So I just want to add that to the conversation too, because I don't want us to get too. I mean, I understand that the core of this conversation is about validity, valuation, and so on. But I mean, I am always thinking, because National Gallery isn't a commercial entity.
No.
So I think about the other value systems that can be brought to the conversation when we're talking about valuation, validation, and so on.
Well, I agree, and to me, that's the role of the museums, right? They're not commercial institutions, even though they do have gift shops, but that's a whole different story.
Yeah.
But
make some money.
Yeah, you gotta keep the doors open, right?
Yes.
But the main thrust of it is to perform that social function, so that people can come in and see and talk about the work. They don't have to be millionaires to buy it if the works are valued to that level. I remember when I first opened my gallery in 1988, Elizabeth Catlett was the first exhibiting artist, but before she agreed, I had to actually agree to the prices that she had established, and the prices she established were, relatively speaking, low, because her idea was that the work can't be inaccessible to people. She wanted just people that are ordinary people, quote unquote, and not just rich people, to be able to afford the work if they wanted to bring it into their home. So, I mean, and that in particular, of course, nowadays, it's a lot different. She's passed away in 2012, and I saw some of her work selling for lots of money. But
it's exploding.
But the point is, though, she had that sort of bent to. Some artists are leaning in that direction and saying, listen, just as a general statement, I want the work to be accessible and talked about. I mean, some of the things that she was talking about were pretty heavy subjects. Her famous I Am the Black Woman series, for instance, had a scene of lynching in it. And so, this is not something that is designed to, be pretty something on your wall kind of a deal. She was just basically describing, that was in the 40s when she created it. She was describing a reality that was pretty harsh. So anyway, I see that the social value is something very important, I think. And
I think
I agree
so.
with the earlier comment. It shouldn't be overlooked.
I think so, because in my interactions with collectors is one of the things that I have observed in these other genres too, and their growth correlates exactly with their public responding to the artists and wanting to collect these works. So, for instance, I use African American art as an example. Once African Americans themselves started to want to have this work in their homes, as they became, they grow in the middle class and a little bit more disposable income and so on, and the growth of collecting art from these artists, and then the artists also wanting to make certain works affordable that they can be collected. The growth in the entire genre happened once those folks started to bring the works into their homes and build collections. So it's kind of a parallel. The social aspect of it assists in building that monetary value. They work hand in hand, but there's definitely an aspect to the social value, because you want to be able to look in your home. I know for me, I want things on my walls to reflect my culture, my background, and my upbringing. And those are the aspects that are important, I think, to one of the aspects that's important to the growth of any genre.
Eric, I would like you to speak to how the social aspects of the art expresses itself in the individual collections that you had to oversee and assess.
Well, of course, everybody has different objectives when they're collecting. And I've seen the range in the 30 some odd years I've had the gallery. For some people, as much as they would admire that piece I was just telling you about, that was one of the panels in Elizabeth Catlett's I Am the Black Woman series.
Right.
They didn't want to wake up in the morning and the first thing they see is a man with a rope around his neck, you know? So there were certain limitations. There was an appreciation, but not necessarily something that they want to include. At the same time, though, that same person just might invest in her depiction of Harriet Tubman leading people out from slavery. It was, again, a reminder of a very difficult period, but at the same time, it had a sort of a positive message about courage and about the resistance to slavery and so on like that. And most people that I've dealt with are collecting things that, as Anderson mentioned, that reflect their own culture, their own perspective. And that could include sometimes abstract pieces. A lot of times people, my experience, abstractions, the more abstract, the less somebody might regard it. But as I try to explain to people, you know, you listen to jazz music, for example, I mean, it's pretty abstract and you can still appreciate it. Patterns and so forth are something that can be attractive. And, you know, it's not up to me to decide what people collect. But in my experience, though, people, generally speaking, people do collect, as Anderson mentioned, they have the same similar priorities. There's been a handful of people that are more interested in the bling aspect of it and want to show off. And that's been, thankfully, kind of a minority situation. When I say very few people that I've dealt with are in that category, but I have dealt with some. And that's just one of the realities there. But for the most part, people want things on their walls that reflect who they are, what their tastes are, and so on. So
I think this is a great opportunity for us to bring our audience in to weigh in on this conversation that we've been talking about. And I've been seeing a lot of comments in the chat, and I would love for these ones to unmute your mics. Well, tech support will help you and join the conversation. I see Jamani Council had said, I think this conversation is very much valid. However, the commercial value of the art, the commercial value of the artist and his or her art may not be needed. I believe the social value of art locally is much more needed. I'd love Jamani to join us and talk a little bit about what their perspective is on that. You can feel free to raise your hands if you have questions or comments that you would like to share with us as well. We'd love to hear from you as we engage everyone, including any young artist or any artist at all who may be a part of this conversation. While we wait for them to join us, I see so far, let me see, I see Sasha K. Hines. She has her hand raised. In the meantime, can we have tech support unmute her so she can join our conversation with a question or a comment? You're on mute.
Hello.
Hi.
All right. Thanks for allowing me to speak. And what I'm going to say might come off harsh, but I think it's needed to be said, right? But I'm not trying to be disrespectful or anything. But whenever you're having a conversation that is going to be impactful for young people, right? And if you look into your, I don't know, probably don't know who are the audience members, but most of us are young. And the conversation really and truly, I've been listening it. And it's been about what you have done, and like what you have done and what this and that. And really and truly, I personally cannot see myself doing the same. So how is it that you can, and the next thing is that a lot of us are not going to be in the gallery. So how can we move the conversation out of the gallery and highlight spaces such as NLS and stuff like that? Because I know O'Neill know these people, and inviting people within the Jamaican Art Society who could have a stronger conversation, such as Verily, such as Deborah Anzinger. These are people that you could have invited. I'm not saying that these people on the panel don't know what they're saying, but I'm just saying that this is one of the common issues when it comes to having conversations around art. This was a great opportunity to have people who could have, speak about the problems that we're really having and give us a little bit of hope, because I don't feel hopeful right now.
Okay, thank you so
much.
Well,
can I say something to this?
Sure.
Sasha, we would like to hear. You have the floor right now. What would you like us to know and share with us what issues that concern you?
She's unmuted.
Can you unmute her again? She's muted again. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
So because I am not the only person in the group, I cannot, speak for everybody, because
we want to hear yours.
But that's the thing I'm saying. Okay, so for me, I am a social practicing artist. My artwork mostly focus on tackling issues of violence and sexual abuse against people in Jamaica, right? And I can tell you from the bat, you guys have been talking about money, and I cannot create art around. If I create art around the idea of being rich, I will not be an artist, right? So it would have been great to hear how people, navigate talking about social issues and talking about and becoming, successful with that practice, if that makes any sense to you. So some people doing, and remember, not everybody is in the gallery. So when we're talking about a visual arts conversation, I know that maybe it's not going to be like an all-rounded thing, but then if you constantly talk about gallery, then some people is not going to understand what you're talking about, because some people, and even most people in the group now, are gallery-based artists. And I don't think Kingston Creatives really
gallery representation.
I'm just saying artist. It doesn't have to be like going into the actual space, but having the mindset of going in, if you get what I'm saying. So some people don't have that mindset. Only they understand what I'm saying?
No, I do understand what you're saying, Sasha, because the thing is, I have been trying to move the conversation a little away from
I felt like you were trying to do that.
The concept of it. And the thing is, I understand particularly the issue, because remember, I don't know if you were here when I was talking about, the different validations for art then, in terms of social issues, because like your work is tackling issues that people don't want to talk about, that people are trying to that people are trying to kind of push under carpet and not address, when there are critical issues that are facing so many men and women, mostly women, but we're not having the conversations about it in so many ways, and it's causing greater problems. So I do agree. I also think that that the conversations need to move out of the hallowed halls of particular institutions as well. So even the work at NLS, venues like Olympia, initiatives like And I Resume the Struggle, I think those are important. Are extremely important, because the thing is, if there is supposed to be something coming out of our artistic community that's not generic. You need to have variety in terms of spaces and places for artists to be able to be explored and to explore. So I see what you're saying, and I totally agree with you.
And we're also on the same page in relation to some of the, in terms of inclusivity and including more persons who can add and contribute to the conversation. So
yeah, to the local space, because I feel like, and as I say, it's no disrespect to who is on the panel, but like, and I log in and I hear the accents. I'm not saying that you're not Jamaican or whatever, but at the same time, you keep referencing overseas market and this and that and this and that, when really and truly the issues that we have on the island is not being tackled. So we gone foreign already and we're not dance our yard yet. So this is the problem I am having. Maybe we need to have more conversations around.
Well, I think the subject matter that we are discussing encompasses all of these areas, and from the local to the international. I mean, valuation is, and valuing our own art within our individual countries is what we're discussing here. And I think we're trying to cover those bases in a short space of time. But I could say this because I'm not from a mainstream anything. I mean, I'm a total outsider, and I've worked with different spaces, galleries, from institutions down to alternative spaces. And one of the things I could say to you as a young artist, many of them that I have worked with over the years, either here in the US or in the Caribbean, they got together, or they started a movement among themselves, and they didn't wait for anyone else to tell them where they could do it or where they could show their art. They found, if the galleries weren't available or if the institution wasn't available, they found an alternative space and started their own outreach.
Collectives.
And I worked with many artists like this in their formative years. And what it allows them to do is gain confidence, be able to have people respond to their work, and sometimes there might be criticism involved, but it's really all about your growth. And these artists who started in these alternative spaces and even started co-ops among themselves, co-op artist groups where they can get together and produce events and shows and tackle topics like Sasha K mentioned, because we do need to speak about as I tell people all the time, life isn't pretty all the time. So, you know, every piece of art that you see or that you encounter is not going to be about beauty or stuff like that. I mean, I remember a few years ago working with an artist who did an entire series of work on domestic violence, and the images were very, very stark. But what happened with that artist's work was that an organization who was working in that area saw the value of what he was doing and gave him an opportunity to show the work to a wider audience. But he was the one that decided, well, look, we need to tackle this particular area, and I am going to do it regardless of if it's going to sell or not. Now, these are the type of things that you just have to go out on a limb and do sometimes. And your point is very valid as far as discussing local conditions and how artists can grow their opportunities and abilities to produce what they want to produce.
Thank you so much. I know O'Neill has to pop off. Before you go, O'Neill, is there any contact information or any way that persons, if they have questions, if they can, for the National Gallery, where they can jump to, if you could drop those in the chat before you jump off, we would very appreciate that.
Well, I would like to continue some of these conversations because I think they're needed and valid. I often hesitate to just drop my email address in an open chat, but I will, because I think that it's important for people. And if I don't respond immediately, everybody, I have a lot of things trying to handle. So I can actually drop my email address in. And, if we can have, conversations, we can. So I'll just I'll just do that. Sorry that I have to leave, but I had another.
No problem. We appreciate your contribution to this conversation. And of course, Sasha K, and other artists who would have had questions and wanted to engage you further can definitely reach out to you after this. We see some other persons wanting to share. We're gonna go to Rahul and then Corey. If tech support could assist with unmuting.
I think I might have sent it directly to you, but you can share it.
Okay, I will do.
All right.
Pleasure speaking with you, O'Neill.
Great
Take care,
talking.
Very
All
good
right.
to meet you.
Give everybody else a voice too. All right.
Yeah, hello everybody. Respect O'Neill. I'll catch up with you. I'm saying some things,
man.
but there's some things I'm going to level. You may go before I'm finished, but I'm going to tackle something important first. Being an artist, what it means being an artist. Yes, there's struggle, but there's also a passage where you can get to where you need to get to. Mr. Anderson was tackling something important from the direction of an artist and having a direction and being strong and firm in knowing that direction that you're going and that you will succeed. That takes time sometimes, and it is paced, right? Now, let me tell you this. I'm an artist for all my life, right? And I've done multiple arts and I'm publishing multiple arts, right? But what I can tell you is you have to be patient with this thing. You have to be humble with this thing. And it doesn't matter what area of the arts or discipline you're in. This takes time, focus, a lot of discipline, and it takes a lot of research. Now, separate of that, right? You have to be careful of how you outburst or how you throw things out, because it's a very broad subject when we're dealing with art. Now, art is something everybody will want to make money from. It doesn't matter how humble you want to be about saying, yes, you love this and you're going to do this. Eventually, you'll want to reap some rewards from it. Whether you're going to get the exposure or whether it's going to come by way of a lot of financial, you want exposure, meaning that you still need some kind of value. There are different types of value. You can get there over time. Some may make the monies quicker. Some may get exposure, but then make the money. There are different ways you're going to get there. But the key thing about this is being humble and focused, okay? And that's a primary discipline every artist must have. You must have this, okay? Now I'm going to go into some things, all right? I'm a published artist in many things. I make monies, yes. There are times I do things, there's no monies on it, but it's the passion that gets things through. There are things that I've done that connect into other links, right? This is the work that I did that I would never say it doesn't have a value. I know when I do something, it has a value. It may not value today, but it may value the next few years. Let me give you a quick idea now, Sasha, right? And I'm going to look at it from a local perspective, but then you have to look at it as a global perspective. Are you going to only focus on just local, or do you want to be known or get your work published to get the awareness or the message you have out in those work out? Do you think that local alone will support that in all you would need? So what you have to look at, you have to have a global perspective, but yes, you must have a national perspective, as in your region and as in your locality. But you also must have the global picture mindset. That is much more important too. Another thing I'm going to show you from the business aspects or the logic aspect of art, right? We may have practitioners who are doing well. Some will know how they get there. Some may not know how they get there. Okay, so some get through because of the persistence. So luck will reach them, as you would say, but it's not luck. It's that they have been putting out that discipline. As Mr. Anderson touched on an important point, they have been putting in that work on a specific theme or subject, and that end up landing them in a pooling or link of people who can see that message or the deliverable of that work, how powerful it is. Then it can be marketed. Then you can get that push. But as I said, it comes by pacing. Each person is going to have a different pace in this, okay? And so pace yourself gently and just take it in strides. It will all come together. Focus on the things that you know you want to create. Keep on working on it. It will come to life. Somebody will understand that body of work you're doing, right? I can give you a lot of dramas about government offices I've been in, sitting down with people, explaining stuff. talking about art education and the lack of uneducated stuff within the art, as in nobody understanding what it is. So ridicule comes from family, comes from even just your parents, the rest of your outer family, friends. There's a lot of ridiculing of art, right? There's a lot of miseducation about art. There's no understanding that it is multiple discipline, tons of disciplines within, right? And all these are areas of where you can achieve and make great monies. But how well is it taught? How well is it understood? So these are some of the challenges we have, right? I think Ms. Pupi and some of you guys have been touching that. From the primary level, right up into the secondary, even the tertiary level, there's a lot of confusion. And so there are things we have to straighten out through those systems as well, right? Which is the education system.
I know you are well read with this, and what I'd love for you to do for us is to drop your information in that chat so others can connect with you and go deeper into understanding what you're speaking about. I'm sure they appreciate it. I appreciate your knowledge very, very much. So please feel free to drop that there. I know we have a couple others who want to also share their thoughts. There you go. So guys, feel free to connect with each other. Drop your email addresses, your handles on the different platforms, your titles, whatever it is you'd like for others to know about you, so that there can be connection and there can be networking with us. So thank you so much, Raul. I know Corey and Jamani has been wanting to speak for a little bit as well. So we're gonna go to Corey and then we're gonna go to Jamani briefly so we can hear their thoughts and have everyone joining in the conversation. Thanks so much, Raul. And thank you too as well, Sasha, for joining us earlier. So I see Corey unmuted. Welcome to the meetup.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. First of all, I must say I appreciate this. I appreciate whatever we are, we're doing here. I really do appreciate it. My opinion will be coming from a perspective where I was a student. I was once a student at an art institute, but then moved on to a different university, trying to study and understand culture from a different, a different perspective. Because what I realized is that most of us artists here in Jamaica, and I'm speaking from a general perspective because I was once there, is that most of the artists here in Jamaica really don't have don't get the chance to explore culture from a theoretical perspective, but more so from what is being taught to them at whichever art school they may go. I think one of the issues we really face in the Caribbean is that most of these conversations, and I've made mention to it in the chat before, the relationship between hegemonic influences and visual art, is that most of these conversations that we have, up and coming artists, young artists in Jamaica, they really don't get the chance to be a part of, these conversations. And I think one of the reasons why our sector is, I won't say dying, but it's not evolving how we want it to evolve, is because the art practices that the art form that we practice here in the Caribbean, it is, I won't say, and do not crucify me for this, but I won't say it's outdated or anything, but I think we ought to evolve from where we are right now. I think how they want, I don't want to call any names, but I remember I went to this particular school where the things that they want me to study was not the route in which I wanted to take, right? And I feel like because I didn't want to take that route, I was sort of marginalized in a sense. And that was one of the reasons why I had to move and, start to experience culture from a different perspective. Because I think Caribbean artists, just like dancehall music, it is so repetitive, and because it is so repetitive, it kind of lessens the chance for growth. And if you don't practice a particular art form, then chances are you will not be recognized here in the Caribbean. Or we made mention of the art gallery here in Kingston. You won't find your work whether it's showcased there or placed on a wall, because you are kind of unconventional in a sense, and it kind of lessens the chance for growth in our sector. Raul, I don't know how you pronounce your name. You would have made mention of being humble, and that's one of the reasons why I was asking you, what's your definition of humility? Because I think one of the reasons why our sector is not growing is because we've been humble for too long, or we've been silent, which is I'm considering humility. We've been, a little bit silent for too long, and we don't get opportunity or, forums like these to express ourselves, to talk about the things that we would want to explore as visual artists, or, what we like. And we also, I saw in the chat where people are talking about money. We have to, in the Caribbean, where visual artists are, where we are concerned, we have to think about monetary gains, because at the end of the day, we live in a society where the economy is, we know the economy very, very bad. In layman terms, the economy bad in Jamaica, or it's not so great in the Caribbean. So we definitely have to look at art from, the perspective. Gone are the days when we do art because we love it. Because one, materials are expensive. The things that we need to create art, they're expensive. So the panelists, many persons may not agree. I agree to some things the panelists are saying, that we have to look internationally. But most of my artwork that are sold to international, in the international market. And this is really because some of the things that I am, I'm interested in, Jamaica is not necessarily interested in. And like I mentioned before, hegemonic influences, certain people in Jamaica, which I've seen, only certain people in Jamaica or even the Caribbean get recognition or get the voice to say, or the opportunity to say some things, and this is why I'm really grateful that I was even given a chance to unmute my mic and say something, because I've been meaning to say, things like this for the longest while. So I appreciate this. And I think if I saw many persons saying it in the chat, if we tackle the things from it gets worse, like systematic preferences. We talk about maths, English, careers, becoming a doctor. These are the things that are very important in Jamaica, or we see important in Jamaica, not necessarily visual arts, because growing up, they tell you that visual arts is a hobby. It's not really a career. I remember one teacher told me, to drop visual arts, because I told him I want to be an artist, and he told me to pick up architecture. So like these are the things that we need to, tackle, and we need to give young artists the opportunity to say things more. And humility does not work in 2022, especially where if you want to, and I mean, when I say humility, you have to have respect, because respect goes a long way, but you have to have a voice. And if you decide to stay silent forever, then you will not grow. As a young artist, you will not grow. So you definitely have to speak up. Be mindful when you're speaking up, to be very respectful, because respect, it carries you a long way. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Thank you so much, Corey. That sounds like we need a part 2 to this conversation. And it sounds like yourself and Sasha and others who are on this call need to be on that panel. And I would love to invite you guys to share your thoughts as well to Kingston Creative, info@kingstoncreative.org. The art district manager is on the call as well. And so if it is that you would like to have a part 2, be a part of that panel conversation, steer it in the way that will be beneficial for Jamaican artists and creatives, we definitely want to hear from you. So feel free, I'm gonna type it in the chat right now. So that's info@kingstoncreative.org. And in the meantime, I see Jamani wants to speak. Jamani Council, I'd invite tech support to please unmute their microphone so we can hear from them as well.
My name is Jamani Council.
I can hear you, but you are not hearing you very well. I believe you're trying to speak, but your audio isn't coming through clearly. Sounds like we're having a bit of a tech support with Jamani there.
Yeah, I'm not hearing him.
Not hearing at all. All right, do you have an earpiece? You possibly could remove it and try using the device's microphone.
Hello, are you hearing me better now?
You're very, very low.
Very faint, very faint.
Do you want to drop? Well, I'm going to read, so in the meantime, your comments while you figure out how to get your audio to us.
Yeah.
So,
well, yeah, go ahead. I mean, I think it's important, though, for young artists to have a voice and interact with this conversation here.
I'd ask tech support to reach out directly to you, Jamani, and see if they can have that problem solved. So you can mute for a moment. Tech support will reach out to you directly. I will, in the meantime, read the comments that I've seen from Jamani Council, and our panelists can definitely comment until they return. So I had mentioned previously, they spoke about the social value of art being important, and agreeing with Bernard on the scholarly investment of art and the interjection of the value of art in the social, political, and economic aspects of the region. Art must be understood as a development tool rather than monetary potential. I'm going to pause there for any one of the panelists to comment. Eric, is that something you want to tap onto?
Oh yeah, sure. I think, so if most of the artists that I talk to, when they stand before the easel or whatever their medium is, they're not thinking about the saleability of the work. They're just speaking from whatever inspiration that's talking to them at the time. So, I mean, I think the creative process itself is, to begin with anyway, I think social. It's the artist's interpretation of whatever they're trying to translate onto whatever medium they're using, whether it's sculpture or painting or drawing or whatever it is. And then after that, it takes on a life of its own. And that's when other factors kick in. Galleries like mine will either decide or not decide to pick it up and try to promote it. And then all the commercial aspects kick in. But I think the life of the work itself, in most cases anyway, starts out as being social. And then, like I said before, I think the museum's important function is to provide that context, to do the scholarship, to assign a curator that not only selects the works, but understands them and writes about them and helps us all to understand them and put them into some sort of context. So I think for something to be commercially successful, it has to, I think, have a social component, as it turns out. So anyway, that's my take on it.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on the comments, and it's been good and engaging. I'm glad to hear them, all the above, and creating these points of conversation was my intention, because I spent a lot of time in Jamaica, and I'm an exhibiting artist that came out of Jamaica, and I've been on the international scene, but I've spent a lot of time self-validating what I do and creating opportunities for my art, getting it published, getting it seen, and it's complaining and criticizing. I've been there. And when I realized that it's not really about me, it's about the work. So the sooner I got around to getting the work out and getting it seen, wherever it can be validated. And if it doesn't get validated, I make sure it gets seen at whatever level of societies that I get to get it shown. And it builds, and sometimes it takes a lifetime of building. My reputation has sustained me for the last 30 years without any representation of any gallery. And I've done museum shows, I've gotten international commissions, but I still get up every day and use my discipline in my craft and put it to use on a daily basis, waiting for and preparing for when the opportunities come to me. Because at this point, a lot of time as an artist, the opportunities come to you. You go out, you can try and create it, but until you get directed or chosen, you have to be prepared. And you have to be in that studio and putting out the work. But I just want to say that it's been a great series of comments, including the text comments, because I've been following those. And I'm very pleased with what's going on so far.
I'd like to make a quick comment after you finish.
I see Jamani.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
So we're gonna give them an opportunity to share with us. So I see you're on mute.
Hello,
Jamani?
now?
Okay, go again.
Hello.
Okay,
we are
Yeah,
welcome
we're
hearing
to
you.
here.
Meetup. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Yes, my name is Jamani Council. I am currently a final year student at the Edna Manley College. So I am kind of in the midst of this from coming and going.
Sure.
Yes, and just as many of the audience here, I am very much grateful for this opportunity to be having this conversation. But yes, right on point. I mentioned the social value of art because I have coming to art school and taking on art as a career. Seeing to make a living from art was kind of one of the things to do. Yes, to make a living from the practice. But however, I have noticed the kind of lack of uh, importance, the triviality that is being and the social importance of art. Throughout art history, we have seen or we have learned about how art has grown, and art was always of monetary value, but it has a lot to do with the social change and the political change that has been happening throughout history. And even now, as a people, we are victims of that. So a lot of the population locally, Jamaicans, don't understand art for the philosophical aspect of art. It's more rather than the beauty of art as it relates to aesthetics. But how about the philosophical aspect of art where art brings forth new knowledge and wisdom and understanding and to move forward as a society? Understanding art in this way will surely bring forth monetary value. It is inevitable. I believe the art will speak for itself. Even producing art as a final year student and the kind of research-based interrogation that we have to be doing, it has really bring me to a point to think about the art ecosystem, what is lacking and what not might be lacking. Because I noticed that a lot of the panelists here are very knowledgeable and they are head of a lot of art institutions. So why is there still a lot of dysfunctionality? I think about these things, and it is a greater issue. It's a political issue. It is no longer an issue of us artists only, but even as some of the panelists said, understanding art personally as an artist and how we function and the kind of steps that we can take towards the artist to becoming more than the artist to become a creator, the artist to become several other things that are needed to promote art as an institution by itself. So I very much agree with a lot of the comments that are being put out there. People saying, oh, the starving artist, so on and so forth. I don't think that's even a thing. People create business every day. Some business strive, some business fail. It's just the system of things and how things work. So definitely, our conversations can't be a thing where 1 month. It has to be weekly. It has to almost be daily. It has to almost become an hourly conversation. This is our careers we're talking about. There has been uh, uh, several movements throughout art. For example, the Dadaists or the Fluxists. These were persons that were even uh, looking at art as some kind of ironic thing, something comedic. And at the same time, it had a lot of theoretical interrogations. Me saying this is showing how we doing art as something to represent has this same emphasis both on practice and theory, where we have to be involved with the issues of the country and a whole and us as a people, whether it be as a race or as a region. Definitely, it has to be that kind of conversation. We have to be functioning as a more effective aspect of the society more than just image makers. So this conversation is not even rooted in the value of art or the validation of the artist, but how much do we need to do more, how much more we need to do. And there has been several manifestos put out by artists of what art is supposed to be and what is an artist and who is not an artist. And there is this whole chain of history to show that art was never a thing that was art had to earn its value within society. And this is a thing that we must take on as a region to say, make how do we make art valuable, not from monetary, but even as an aspect of society, aspect of culture, more than this, or representation and a strong European ideal of art. And if we're looking at art in this sense, yes, people speak that, oh, it's locally, you can't speak about overseas, but why not? If we are looking to overseas to validate what is art and the kind of art we produce, why we don't look at overseas? It is, you have so many artists functioning to and making so many artwork, hundreds of artwork. They were never sold before one had been sold. It's an investment. It's a practice. You can't be looking at art as the same as doctors and lawyers and so on and so forth. Yes,
Sounds like I
it
need
is
to invite
similar.
you
It's a
to the second round, Jamal.
profession, but it's even more than that. So
Jamani, it sounds like, I think your audio is starting to get distorted. But I was also saying, it sounds like we need to invite you to be on the panel for the next round of this conversation. This is just a start. And I'm sure the Kingston Creative team has a lot more to go from here. And definitely, when we look at the conversations we've had, I want to thank the panelists for their wealth of information and experience. And I also want to thank the audience for being so open and candid and honest about their feelings of what we're talking about. And I would definitely invite each of you to email Kingston Creative, join the link to give your feedback, to share what are some of the conversations you would like to be a part of personally by being on those panel conversations. We could talk all night about art. I mean, it's a never-ending conversation, but of course, we have to close for tonight. And I want to say thank you so much for everyone who joined us tonight. It doesn't end here. For those of us who are on Zoom, if you want to, feel free to stick around and have some networking conversations. Drop your handles in the chat. Connect with those who are here so that you can expand that reach of art. But I want to say thanks again to everyone who has joined us, and have a wonderful evening. And I look forward to the round 2 of this very beautiful conversation.
Thank you very much for having me. This was a